Hey guys, welcome. So if you caught it yesterday, I did a long PowerPoint video, which people were actually quite receptive to, I guess, as a format. I had some nice advice from you guys about that as well, which I do appreciate. But I was talking about Season 6. Now, I think a lot of you guys, as I mentioned, probably clicked that thinking I was going to do story speculation, which is totally a good idea, and we can look into. There are definitely some cool hooks from End of Dragons. But really what I was talking about is like, what kind of content I want to see from Season 6, what I want to see the devs focus on in terms of systems and release pace and all that kind of stuff. You know, like my ultimate desires that felt at least somewhat realistic to me. It was a bit of a deceptive video because I kind of took the best patch ever, in my opinion, that's Daybreak, the triple release. And I said, hey, let's use this as a template, you know? It's only the best that ever happened in 10 years, that's totally realistic, right? So maybe I was a little bit unrealistic with it, but I had a really great response from you guys. Lots of people said it really resonated with them and that they really hope the game goes in even just some of those directions. They felt it would be really, really powerful. So it's been really, really nice to read your comments. There were numerous other points though, because it was a jam-packed video. It was an hour and 10 minutes long with a lot of different topics in there, and it spurred some good discussion. So there are many, many comments I had where I thought I really want to respond to this, where just typing out a response wouldn't be good enough. So I want to platform some of your ideas and sort of bounce some ideas back that I think are important. Give me a chance to say some stuff which previously I had left unsaid. Starting off here, we have Cody, and there were a lot of comments. I favoured some with like heavy amounts of thumbs, we'll see. But this one here, Cody says, part of the problem with dungeons, instead of fractals, is system creep. So one of the big things I proposed, which is actually, honestly, the craziest thing I think I said in that video. A lot of people didn't even really like challenge or talk about, but I think the craziest thing I said was even daring to suggest we could go back to dungeons. For years and years and years, it's been fractals, and I think most players have kind of got over the fact that they've moved away from dungeons. Well, actually, I think most players are grumpy about it, but we've accepted the new reality, right? And here I am, suggesting to go back to another reality, suggesting to juggle two systems at once. It's a very crazy thing I said. So Cody wanted to talk about this here. Part of the problem with dungeons instead of fractals is the system creep. Like now we have new dungeons, but the new ones are better to do than the old ones. So now we have Icebrood Saga strikes, and we have End of Dragons strikes, and we might have Season 6 strikes. You might say, sure, but we have the raids wing 1 to 7, but they were all defined. We need a better naming scheme so we can have better strikes. Also, the idea that raids are not economical, but long explorable dungeons are viable, those are fundamentally the same thing. So I did actually type a response to Cody as well. If you go digging through the YouTube comments, you'll see it. But I want to do a fuller response here. Now, first, on this idea of system creep, I think you have a really good, really important point. And in fact, here's another message from elsewhere, from Six, who said, I know it's not a new observation, but what a convoluted mess this game is. How many different terms and titles is ArenaNet going to use for their content? It's just way too much. They've got to streamline things moving forward and stop changing directions all the time. Yeah, so I'm very, very keen on this, and if you look at my video there, you know, when I say, hey, let's have this idea of expeditions, I kind of cringe even listening to myself, because it's kind of just throwing more stuff on the pile like this. I think Guild Wars is in a weird place where it has this reputation for chopping and changing its systems a lot, but actually, as a long-term player of the game and the franchise, this is something that happens with MMOs a lot that just go years and years and years. It's weird to acknowledge, actually, that I think most of the chopping and changing happened pre-Heart of Thorns, or right up until Heart of Thorns came out. And the truth is, guys, Guild Wars is basically 10 years old now, and for the vast majority of that, the past half decade, 6 years even, they've actually been fairly even keel, so we have a lot of, like, craft. I'm just kind of wondering at what point, how many years does it take before they can start experimenting again? Because, you know, you look through enough of my content, you're going to see me saying, look, this is too convoluted, there's too many system reworks, they need to stick with things and run the course. I'm kind of in a mindset now where I think that they really did stick the course for a very long time. I think Season 3, POF, Season 4... even to a lesser extent, the Icebrood Saga, though, they started changing things there. Obviously, we had a lot of new terms, strikes and DRMs and so on. I think they spent a long time sticking the course, and I didn't see Guild Wars grow to be a massive MMO. I saw alternate MMOs that were smaller than Guild Wars eclipse Guild Wars, which is one of the reasons I'm talking about Final Fantasy XIV so much recently, because it was not always the case that people cared more about that MMO. Most of the time, I think people cared on the mainstream about Guild Wars or saw them as equal, but you know, there has been a very definite shift over the past few years, and I kind of look at other games like that, and I see that they have the potential to gain new fans and new audiences, and Guild Wars hasn't been in that place. So, with the idea of system creep and stuff, I totally get it. And I think they need to be very careful about that. But I also do believe, after enough years, there has to be a moment where they take a sledgehammer to some stuff, and they say, look, this isn't working, we do need to tweak things a bit. We got this reputation over half a decade ago, but the game needs help, so they have to be able to put that in. So when you look at my recommendation with strikes and raids, you know, I talked all about the branding of the thing, and I talked about splitting all those old raids into individual islands, essentially making them strikes, and then just calling them all raids. I'm trying to be respectful of the fact we don't want all these terms. I don't want there to be raids and strikes. I don't want there to be a delineation between old strikes and new strikes, and then even newer strikes. Like, this stuff is just terrible for the game, and there's awful clarity with it. You can already see when you look at, like, the dailies for End of Dragons, it recommends me, like, a priority strike, and then an old daily strike, and then a new daily strike. I don't like any of this stuff, and we'll come back to that in just a second. So, yes, the idea of saying dungeons is really crazy, because you're now juggling two sticky 5-man instanced formats. And Guild Wars 2 doesn't need two of those formats. To do what I said in that video, and actually do dungeons in Living Worlds, like, that's great, and you guys applaud that so much, and people really love the idea, but if you really think about it, it kind of gives Fractals the shaft, because they probably can't support both. And now Fractals is the weird, aberrant, iffy thing. And have we really solved anything? So, you know, that's why I was really trying to get across in the video that I am a Fractals man, really. And if Fractals had its system improvements, I think it would be better for the game. And in fact, what I would really say, like, further down the road, this isn't necessarily even Season 6, but just for a perfectly structured Guild Wars endgame, like, I used that phrase very briefly in the previous video, this would be a perfect endgame structure at this point. They would still have this problem of the old dungeons. Realistically, way down the line, I would like to see dungeons, all of them, folded into Fractals, just as I recommended raids should be folded into strikes, and then the whole thing just called raids. You know, like, I kind of believe that you could split each individual dungeon path into its own fractal island, and, you know, that could be a part of the fractal system. So now we're not dealing with two systems, we only have one system with one unified currency and brilliant scaling and infinite progression. It'd be really good, wouldn't it? And just like I recommended with strikes, once everything's essentially a strike, rename Fractals to dungeons. Because that's the other thing, right? Like, it is just a matter of branding. And they technically call them Fractal Dungeons right now, but it's not enough. You know, just call Fractals of the Mists Guild Wars 2's Dungeons at that point, when you don't have two separate content streams there, and it's clearly like, oh, these are the old dungeons, they're dungeon icons on the minimaps, blah, blah, blah. When it's all one, it's all jumbled in together, I think people will buy a rebrand at that point, just as they would buy a rebrand of the strikes into raids. Hopefully I've articulated this kind of free-form, flowing commentary here in a way you guys all understand. And I think that at that point, that would be the perfectly structured Guild Wars endgame stuff, because you wouldn't have a billion systems. You would have epic bosses for 10-man called raids, and there would be difficult versions on them, the CMs, whatever you want to call it, and you would have dungeons, which are infinitely progressing and have all the beautiful meatiness of Fractals for the 5-man. You'd have a 10-man format, a 5-man format, and then open world, scales all over the place, and there you go. Obviously, we're a long way away from that. I don't know whether I believe ArenaNet really will do it. As far as I'm concerned, from where I'm sitting, if they're properly doubling down on Guild Wars 2 and saying, hey, this is the game, I think they should be open to these kinds of things, because they should look to keep this game supported a decade into the future or beyond. You know, MMOs are very different kind of games, and products and technologies going in a different way than I think most people predicted. And having the confidence to do that, I think that ArenaNet should look at system changes like this, but who knows? It's probably not a Season 6 thing to really have everything ironed out. It kind of made me sad in my video to start each section. For a bit there in the middle, I was saying, hey, this is what they can do. This would be really economical. This would be a really great way to get a ton of meaty content every patch at a regular pace. But, and this is the bit that sucked, every time I would say, but, there needs to be a system update. Oh, here's a system update. And, you know, it's easy to just throw that around, but that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of, like, development time. So now it's like, okay, well, WP, you like this idea, but what if it takes a year before Season 6 starts, because they have to pave the way? And then, what if the way they pave the way isn't even that good? What if these ideas don't work out? We've been in that situation before with Heart of Thorns, haven't we? It's a very difficult situation, and it's easy for me to do a video like I did and just sort of, it's easy for us to sort of vibe on the idea there are easy answers, but there's a lot more risk and opportunity cost involved with throwing stuff around like that, saying, hey, there should be a system update. Anyway, let's get to the next question. Here we have Bleederhosen, who says they need to put metas, speaking of system stuff, they need to put metas on a reward rotation. Make a system where certain metas offer better rewards in certain time frames. This will keep content fresh, profitable, and enjoyable. So this was one of the earlier comments on the video, and got a huge response from you guys. So there's a massive comment thread under this, which I've cut out from this this image graphic here. So I do think this is important as well. I have other thoughts about what Guild Wars can do that aren't necessarily Season 6. I mean, in as much as I want Guild Wars 2 to be in a brilliant place as soon as possible, and Season 6 is next, I mean, sure, we can call them Season 6 things. But what I'm really looking at when I see a comment like yours here, is the other big system thing that I really want to see from Guild Wars, is I want to look at the daily system. I want to look at stuff like resonating slivers. I just mentioned the horrendous confusion between having like daily strikes and priority strikes, and all the dailies in every Living World episode that come in, right? And that's very appropriate to talking about Living World Season 6. And all the dailies that came in on every expansion, and all the dailies that they use to incentivize you to play festivals, and all of it's crap, and none of it's well unified. It's very closely tied to the problem with achievement points to me as well, where it's like achievement points don't feel fun or like a major part of the game to most people, so they're not incentivized to do stuff like all the fun content in the side quests and End of Dragons and stuff. Dailies and achievement points and your whole incentive for doing that stuff, I really want to see ArenaNet take a hard look at, because I think that that's actually a major saving grace for the game. Dailies are a lot like guild missions, in the system got reworked in Season 2 with one of the feature packs, and that, just like with guild missions where they said, hey, we've built this to be expandable and changeable, they did the same with dailies, and like the fact that you can get special item rewards from each thing. But basically they just added a bunch of currencies that were horrendously bloated instantly, had no real value, and dailies aren't really that exciting. You know, one of the best patches that ever came for Guild Wars 2 was years ago, when they realized the economy could support a 2 gold reward on every daily. And 2 gold still means something to a lot of players. Depending on how experienced you are with Guild Wars, how up-to-date your opinion is with Guild Wars, your value of 2 gold is going to be all over the place. Like, I have friends that stopped playing in 2014 that 2 gold, like, blows their mind. But they've never done another update like this. What I really want to point out is that when it happened, everyone loved that 2 gold. Ubiquitously loved that 2 gold. And the dailies were structured in such a clean way that it did amazing stuff for incentivizing old content. Like, you'd go back to the Caledon Forest to do a Caledon Forest jumping puzzle, mixing in with new players, something I alluded to in the previous video, and everyone was there. There were all these huge zergs running around doing that stuff. Or the daily specifically emphasized one specific meta, and it was a really, really populated thing. Or emphasized doing events on one specific map, and it really, really populated that place. What you're asking for here, putting metas on a reward rotation, that's actually, to me, a problem with the daily system. And also, kind of the implicit weeklies we have, like guild missions are on weeklies, and like raid rewards and stuff are on weeklies, and that, like, none of that stuff's transparent. So I do believe very much in like a system thing that looks at this, and that actually solves the problems that you're talking about here. It can even solve achievement points and some other things as well going forward. So that is a big thing that I'd love to see from Guild Wars. It just wasn't entirely, like the idea of yesterday's video was, what would I like to see in Season 6? Like, what would a Season 6 release look like? And I think that this then started getting a little bit off topic. But, yeah, I really do believe in what you're talking about here. And I love to see all these thumbs and all this discussion on this particular comment, because it's an important part of the game, for sure. Next, we have a huge topic. There are about 1,000 variations of this message. Let's go through. Kuba says, I do not agree with cutting voice acting. It feels like changing it to Final Fantasy Wall of Text style. I think most players are not super into lore, I might be wrong, and do not read dialogues and text. I saw many people doing hearts and not even reading what they should do. They were just hitting random creatures and hoping it would be done. I think we've all had this experience. They also have some other completely off-topic new ideas that they'd like to see for the game. You guys can pause if you'd like to read. But I want to talk about this voice acting thing. And a lot of people are saying this exact thing to me, that they don't agree with cutting voice acting. And to that, this might surprise people. I actually went back and listened to my own commentary. I agree with you. I 100% agree that I don't want to cut voice acting. I agree that Guild Wars 2's strength, actually, I had a couple of comments about this, that open world maps and voice acting are two of Guild Wars' greatest strengths. I actually agree on both of those fronts. I think that they're huge, huge values for the game. Voice acting especially. And I remember, as Guild Wars 2 was coming out, all the emphasis that ArenaNet put specifically on dynamic events, as these things with heavy voice acting, because they, and like the way that they did hearts and so on, because they knew people skipped Wars of Text. It crushes me, but I see people doing it. Even here in End of Dragons, you know, I remember a very specific moment. I was in if you're watching my Let's Play, you might remember it. I was in Kaineng and I just read this awesome, like, hero challenge or something, only to see, like, a guy run over, instantly, like, spam F on it, and then instantly sprint off on a sky scale again. And this was like in the early hours where it was like people's first playthrough kind of thing. And you can just tell people are ignoring it. And it sucks and it crushes me. I would make the note though that that's not really even a voice acting thing to me. I bet that players who are doing that aren't even paying that much attention to the voice acting either. You know, they're more gameplay oriented. They're not invested in the setting, and that's fine. They're just kind of a different kind of player. But look, back to the main point. I agree, the game needs voice acting. Guild Wars' strength is voice acting. I would never want to cut voice acting. Now, I went back and listened to my commentary. I think the way I phrased things was a little bit, like, confusing or extreme sounding. I wouldn't ever want to get rid of the commander's voice, especially. I am arguing to reduce the amount of voice acting on the commander. You know, we don't have to instantly imagine the worst case scenario here. I'm just talking about limiting it. And I'm not making the suggestion flippantly. The 30 people for one line thing is very real, and here in the community, it's really easy to hand wave development nightmares like that, I think. But I'm trying to, like, deal in honest scrutiny here. You know, in a video like that, I could have simply said, hey, we need more story, wouldn't that be great, guys? And I could have stopped it there, and you would have all applauded because that's something we all want. But it's not really constructive, is it? We have to be honest and ask ourselves, well, what would we pay for that? What is wasteful about the current practices the studio undergoes? And listen, there are more arguments to what I was talking about yesterday that didn't really make it into the video. I'm talking about reducing the voice acting, and I want to make the observation that there are a lot of levels to which they could limit it, where you as a player, most of the population, wouldn't even be able to tell that it's happened. I'm serious. One of the greatest things about Season 1 and Season 2 especially, as an example that I gave last time because we recently played it through, is because of the amount of people who don't even notice that change had taken place. That there is a whole season, 2 whole seasons, where the commander wasn't speaking, and a good proportion of story enthusiasts hadn't realised until Heart of Thorns came back. And that is a black and white scenario. That is the nightmare you guys are all talking about, and it turns out a huge proportion of people didn't notice, and of those that did, not even all of them felt like it was that big of a deal. You know, we're talking about nearly 3 years of Guild Wars 2's early development. Do you think all the threads during Season 1 and Season 2 were about the commander's missing voice, as far as story discussion is concerned? No, they weren't. They were about patch length, meatiness of experience, and direction of the overall franchise. Those were things which were a problem back then and continue to be a problem today. Turns out that all those text-based moments where the commander gets to interact with people and choose dialogue choices like with the personality system or just whenever they come up actually do count for something and don't need all that voice acting budget. That's years of this game's development where we've been in that position. And I'm not proposing to go that black and white. I just have to point out that there's probably a better middle ground here. Another benefit to reducing their voice is actually you eliminate this chance that the game has for the commander to speak and act in a way you don't like. You know, when I look at story criticisms over the past half decade, since Heart of Thorns came out, you know, especially through Season 4, Season 3, since we got the voice back, most of the biggest story criticisms and where people really lose heart and are annoyed is because the commander is acting in a way they don't like anymore. Because the commander is speaking so much, they become like this huge character. But the character can't act like a Char because it's the same role even if you were an Asura or a Sylvari. So they start being a bit weird. Or like Bram starts being a complete dick and you really don't like that he's being a dick, but you're watching the commander like be really, really nice and sweet and diplomatic when the reality is you want to imagine that the commander's acting a different way. The more that the commander speaks, the more risk there actually is in people to not like certain twists and turns in the story. So you kind of get another value here by reducing it. But that's all I'm arguing. Let me be clear. I'm arguing reducing the voice acting. We're not in a black and white world where suddenly everything has to be walls of text and complete silence. And especially for our other characters, I think, you know, where they're even more economical to talk about. The game can be full of voice acting that fires during dynamic events, voice acting that fires, you know, in big boss fights and stuff. That is the biggest, like, strength and beauty of Guild Wars 2 story development at the moment. I wouldn't get rid of all of that. I would just reduce, if that means that now we can get more weight and depth and meatiness to the patches. And yeah, some people might skip it, but as I just illustrated, I think that those people weren't inclined to enjoy it in the first place. In fact, if you want to be really honest about people who are skipping through dialogue in the open world and don't care about Guild Wars' story, those people who are here for the gameplay, those people would prefer to have less voice acting because they'd have more control over skipping through scenes. Those people don't like standing there waiting and watching the commander blab on and on and on while they're on their third playthrough of End of Dragons because they're doing it for some kind of elite spec collection or something. They would rather have the power to just click through because it's text-based and they're taking it at their own pace. So what, we're kind of sneakily throwing their enjoyment to the side for now in the hopes that enough exposure will eventually get them into it? You know, that's not necessarily the right way forwards either. And finally, let's not forget what I tried to illustrate in the previous video as well, that Season 4 was an amazing season with really, really good stuff as far as the story journal is concerned, but the Living World patches weren't appealing to other communities, other areas of the game like this sticky endgame stuff, and the truth is that even with a really great story journal experience with all that voice acting in Season 4, Guild Wars didn't grow in the way that other games, other MMOs are. So maybe it's time to reassess just how important all this story journal voice acting and intricate detailing really is. So look, there are a lot of very good arguments for what I'm saying, and hopefully I'm not being as extreme in my recommendation either that a lot of you guys had the impression of. Now that ended up a very, very big, long answer to a question. Let's move on to another one. This is a lot shorter and it's basically just a pat on my own back here. We've got Valgrian. Lots of you guys have messages like this. I loved your idea for expeditions. Thank you. Guild Wars 2 isn't a place where you basically don't see any of the world except what's in line with the main story, and there's still lots of exploration to do. I miss the feeling of being able to go off the beaten path like we could so much in Guild Wars 1 and core Guild Wars 2. But I don't really have much to add except just to say thank you. I really like that you guys liked the idea of expeditions because I was very concerned, first of all, with this feature bloat thing I already mentioned, but I was being a little bit cheaty saying, oh, let's just take all the best of all these things. But hopefully I articulated it well. You know, you want the replayability and the scalability in terms of party size of DRMs, but you want the new exploration map vibe of Forging Steel and story of Forging Steel. And also, like, you know, side collections and achievements and repeat, you know, like actual exploration stuff. But then you also want to actually unfog the world map like Fariner. So that's kind of the best of all things. Oh, and you also want it to be, like, possible to do big events, like with Dragonstorm or, like, with the Marionette. So, you know, it is a lot of different things, but I hope there was a bit of clarity there. The one thing I did kind of regret a little bit with my discussion of expeditions before is, you know, some of the examples I gave for expeditions, I think actually would be much better as dungeons. I think expeditions really is about the open world map, and they're about unfogging areas. So stuff like the Divinity's Reach sewers, or like the Deep, right, where it's like underground. That's not an expedition because that's not like unfogging or forging new roads. Those are like dungeons, right? Or fractal islands if we have to go with fractal. You know, fractals would be so perfect if they just weren't this hand-wavy mist stuff. You know, if fractals were just actually real there on Tyria, they kind of had that tangible sense. But in any case, so, yeah, I think I kind of messed up a little bit when I was talking about expeditions there, but otherwise, I think it would be a really valuable thing for the game, especially, and here's the big thing I want to say, since End of Dragons just expanded this world map so much, you know? Like, End of Dragons came out, I did that video where we're really mousing around this huge world, and I just look at it and I think, you know, we're never going to get to go to all these places. If Season 6 is like Season 4, or Season 3, or Season 2, or Season 1. If Season 6 is anything like what they've done before, or even the Iceboot Saga, also known as Season 5, which, by the way, they might like to rename, we're not going to get all that stuff. And what? If the expansions kind of remain the same, then what? We're going to be like 2026 before we even get a couple of new islands. The only way that we actually get to explore more of this is to reassess kind of how Living World handles new exploration. And honestly, that was the biggest thing I wanted to talk about in that video. I wanted to illustrate this point that what we currently view as like open world maps, maybe it can be different, you know, with this idea of expeditions, with this idea of dungeons, like coming back in a more meaningful way than like Fractals does. You actually can create these avenues to get out there and see these places like more regularly, and you know, also decoupling exploration of Tyria from the main story. I think that allows us to actually see this world map. And that was, you know, for me, I've said this many times, I play RPGs, I play Guild Wars for the adventure, for the exploration into new places, and I think that's really at the heart of why I wanted to think about Season 6 so much now that we're done with End of Dragons, because it's like, you know, 6 maps over 2 years, if it's just like the Season 4 thing. You know, we'll get some places dotted around Cantha, maybe a random thing elsewhere up at the Battle Isles or something. Is that really captivating? No, I'd rather have like a lot more little opportunities to fan out. That's where expeditions come in. Next, as a little note, we have Kipisek, who says, I really don't like your idea of expeditions, bringing back the Battle of Lion's Arch. And in general, the way ArenaNet have brought back Living World Season 1 was just not good at all. Imagine you're a new player and you finish the core story, and suddenly to experience a fraction of the events of Living World Season 1, you got to go to the scrying pool, then you got to wait on a timer for Marionette, then you got to go on an expedition. And I'll add to your comment here, then you'd have to go into the Fractals, right, to see some of that stuff. All these different systems will only confuse players. Look, I totally agree with you here as well. I don't think really an expedition for the Battle of Lion's Arch is that great. That could just be a strike mission, because as I just said, it's not getting you out there around the world. That's just hanging around Lion's Arch, and that sort of seems like a waste of the concept to me. But the other side of this, yeah, look, Living World Season 1, I am not recommending gets like dumped in little updates. I, in truth, don't really like what they did last summer with the Marionette. I don't really like what they did with the scrying pool. Look, I appreciate that ArenaNet are trying to reuse Season 1 and are trying to create the story. I view like those scrying pool updates as the works of some really passionate people who really wanted to see Season 1 back in. And I like the impulse, but it has to be a linear thing that you go through in the story journal. And realistically, the gameplay isn't as important as the introductions to Destiny's Edge 2.0. You know, the status quo that we've been left with at the end of Dragons still has these characters around, and people want real introductions to them. It feels very weird to spend so long focusing on Logan and Ritlock and Zodra and so on, and suddenly you're around Marjorie and Casimir and Timey. There has to be an intro for those characters. My favourite idea for re-implementing Season 1 is in the story journal. It is linear, and I think it's like 3 episodes. That's it. 3 episodes. But in those 3 episodes, you get all the seriously major beats about character introductions. They kind of have to throw My Trin on the pile now as well, since they redid her in End of Dragons, which was great for a lore enthusiast. But yeah, and I actually think by just basically recreating it, they can make Season 1 better than it ever was, because Season 1's kind of overrated by most players as it stands. A direct translation, a one-for-one dump-in, just wouldn't be that fun. And I think the scrying pool instances about Cragstead and the Hatchery actually prove that. Just a couple little more comments here that I loved. Here we've got Dustin, who says, I think ArenaNet needs to take a lesson from the Stellaris Custodian team. The game's been around long enough that things have got mismatched and lost. They need a specific team to go into the game, start unifying old content, which has kind of been a big theme we've been talking about here. They could definitely work on some old bugs, stuff like that, but some bigger stuff could include a unification of the end game content, including reworks of dungeons, unifying everything between dungeons, raids, strikes, fractals, making endgame more approachable for more people, or revamping activities, making things like Keg Brawl and South on Survival worth it. Okay, so you've just thrown a ton of stuff at the wall, and, you know, I'm a little bit leery about, you know, just throwing a ton of things. I want to be very precise about what I'm arguing for and why, because it's a huge game, and there are millions of things they could do. I really just want to look at the big ticket things. But this comparison to the Stellaris Custodian team, I think, is really interesting. If you guys didn't catch it, in 2020, I did a playthrough of Stellaris. I'm a huge fan of the game. If you guys don't know what this Custodian team is, you should definitely look it up. It's incredible, and everyone I see talking about it in that game's community, they're all begging for their main game to have it. And essentially what it is their studio split their development team. They have people working on DLCs and expansions, stuff that will generate revenue. But they actually have a whole other side of them now that are purely there for updating old DLCs, old expansions, bug fixes, patches, just like major reworks and like tweaks, and like it's kind of like the equivalent of in Guild Wars getting new traits added to the game and stuff like that. And it's really, really good. It's like added a lot more value to previous DLCs and just made people very, very, very happy. And I, of course, love this idea for Guild Wars. You know, have a bunch of people that are just working on bumping up core tier and folding systems together and stuff. It's a cool idea, but it's also, like, very idealistic and kind of tricky. You can't copy-paste what works with one game and one studio onto another. The first thing you've got to think about is, you know, Guild Wars and ArenaNet do these kinds of bug factors. Guild Wars never fell into such a crazy broken state with its old DLCs and stuff as like Stellaris did, first of all. They're always doing skill balance, they're always doing bug fixes, sometimes slower than we'd like, but I mean, look at the End of Dragons patches we've already had. So I don't know whether it perfectly fits, and then there's like the logistics of the thing. Guild Wars is already split, or is what we're already talking about. They have expansion team, Living World team, they're both content teams churning ahead. Now you're talking about creating a third slice, which is purely on keeping old stuff and adding things for old stuff. So, you know, I don't know whether it perfectly works, but believe me, I love the way that Paradox has handled the development of their game. I think that a lot of studios can learn a lot from it. The Custodian stuff's been awesome. There's also been a bit of risk with the Custodians, though. They made some very controversial changes with Unity and stuff recently. And when the Custodians start, like, doing big things, I don't know whether they actually... I wonder whether there are some problems there. So I'm curious how they'll go over the future. But yeah, we're talking about Guild Wars and End of Dragons for now, so I'll stop myself. Okay, well, I did have a bunch of other comments that I kind of wanted to get to, but we're already half an hour in, so I guess we'll leave it here. Here's a fun one right at the end. Bomber Fox, he says, I like this burn my eyes out white. Yeah, I don't know, guys. Listen, you might not know this about me, but I don't really use dark mode in anything. I use normal Discord. I don't use dark mode Discord. It didn't even occur to me to maybe retheme that slideshows. The white wasn't on there for everyone. Yeah, it was really interesting hearing some of your takes about the format of the video as well. So thank you for that, guys. I think there is plenty more discussion to be had. So feel free to leave your thoughts down below on any of this, and I will see you on the next one very, very soon. Hope you guys are all having a wonderful day. Thanks to everyone who liked the previous video as well. I think that kind of actually helped boost it a bit. And I'll see you on the next one very soon. Take care now, guys. Bye-bye.